Mike hadn't been married long before he left his wife, Sarah, to work overseas in the Middle East, leaving Sarah to live with his father, Walter, in an old walk-up apartment building near the Staten Island waterfront in New York City. Walter's wife, Mike's mother, Eleanor, had passed away over a decade ago. Two lonely souls under one roof, the silent building seemed to swallow all sound. What appeared on the surface to be a calm New York urban story hid a chilling tragedy. Mike and Sarah had been married for only 2 months when they had to part. Life in the city was tough, and their home was old and run down. Mike, an only child, wasn't great at school. After getting married, he made a living working odd jobs at a major container terminal. Sarah was no stranger to hardship, having grown up as the youngest of 4 sisters and unafraid of marrying far from home or living with her husband's family. All she wanted was a peaceful, loving relationship. But soon, the weight of financial struggles crushed the couple's dreams. Mike heard from co-workers about opportunities in the Middle East as a foreign laborer, where they could earn enough in just 2 years to rebuild their lives. Sarah initially resisted, not wanting to be apart so soon after their wedding. But out of love for her husband and hope for their future, she agreed, praying the 2 years would pass quickly so they could reunite. The morning they saw Mike off at JFK Airport, the air was unusually cold, and a sea breeze from New York Harbor sent chills down their spines. The taxi sped along the highway toward the airport. In the back seat, the couple sat quietly. Sarah didn't say much, just leaned on Mike's shoulder, silent for a long time. At the airport, when it was time to part, Mike pulled his suitcase, looked back at her, his eyes glistening but forcing a smile. His voice was soft, holding back emotion. "I'm only gone for 2 years. Once I've saved enough, I'll come back. We'll buy a bigger place, bring Dad to live with us, and open a diner together so you won't have to work so hard. Then we'll have kids, 2 of them, a boy or a girl, doesn't matter. Happiness will come, I promise." Sarah nodded softly, hugging him tightly as if trying to hold on to his very breath. She lowered her head and whispered in his ear, her voice choked with emotion. "I just asked Dad to look after you for a few days. He's strict, but he's got a good heart. Listen to him, okay? You'll be fine, won't you?" Sarah bit her lip, looked up quickly, kissed him on the cheek and whispered, "I'll be good. Just come back safely. Don't forget me." Mike hesitated for a long time before finally turning and walking quickly toward security, not daring to look back. Sarah stood there for a long time until the airport loudspeaker announced the flight's departure before she turned to head home. The taxi back to Staten Island felt colder than it had in the morning. The wind whistled, sneaking into her collar and chilling her chest. Her father-in-law, Walter's apartment, was in an old walk-up building near the Staten Island waterfront. It was a simple place, built over a decade ago, now with peeling paint on the walls and cracks filled with moss. On the narrow balcony, a few pots of orchids and old potted plants were scattered haphazardly. After retiring, Walter had lived alone, since his wife passed away. Known in the neighborhood for being taciturn, quick-tempered, and rigidly routine-bound, he was a familiar figure. Mike had once told Sarah, "My dad's real strict, but he's got a good heart. He just doesn't know how to show it, so don't take it personally." When Sarah arrived as his new daughter-in-law, she was a bit nervous. But seeing that Walter wasn't overly harsh, she gradually felt at ease. However, from the moment Mike left, the small apartment became unnaturally quiet. On the day she saw her husband off, Walter opened the door without a smile or questions, saying only, "Come in, put your luggage there, and go upstairs to rest a bit. I'll make lunch." She nodded slightly, pulled her suitcase inside, and went straight to the second-floor room she and Mike had shared since their marriage. The room was unchanged. The sheets were the light beige ones she'd put on last week, and the pillow still smelled of Mike's familiar shampoo. Everything reminded her of the husband who'd been gone less than half a day. She sat on the bed, staring blankly out the window, then sighed. feeling a strange emptiness. That afternoon, as Walter promised, he made dinner, simple dishes, watercress soup, scrambled eggs, and soy sauce chicken wings, set on the old wooden table by the window. Sarah came downstairs to eat, picked up her food, and sat across from him. But throughout the meal, he didn't say a word, just ate slowly, occasionally nodding when she offered him food, otherwise staying completely silent. She tried to start conversations, asking if he needed help on the balcony or anything from the market, but he only replied curtly, "No need. I'll handle it." She ate amid the clinking of chopsticks on the bowl, clearly hearing the sea wind whistling through the window cracks. After dinner, Walter cleaned up and told her to rest while he went to the balcony to smoke, his posture hunched, gazing out at the distant Staten Island waterfront. Sarah watched him, feeling a vague sadness, as if this building was too accustomed to the pain of losing loved ones. In the days that followed, Sarah tried hard to be a good daughter-in-law. She woke early to cook, wash clothes, clean the rooms, and make tea for Walter. She carefully followed her husband's advice. Don't talk too much, don't ask questions, and do everything gently and properly. But the longer she stayed in the apartment, the heavier the atmosphere grew with each passing day. She began to feel the loneliness seeping into every meal, every echoing footstep in the hallway between the stairs and bedrooms. Walter spoke little, only occasionally giving instructions about locking the door or watering the plants, never asking what she thought or felt. Everything in the apartment followed an old-fashioned, punctual, unchanging routine. Whenever she passed the living room, she'd see him sitting in the same position in his rattan chair, holding his pipe, staring blankly at the empty sea, as if lost in distant thoughts. She once thought he might be sad, missing his son. But she increasingly felt it was more than that. In those moments, she felt like a stranger, lost in the ancient shell of a man too accustomed to solitude. She knew she should understand, but she couldn't shake the feeling of alienation. Every morning, waking in the empty room next to the closed-off one where she slept, everything felt both familiar and strange, as if she were living in a world that didn't belong to her, futilely trying to touch true warmth. Maybe that's why she grew more cautious. Every word, glance, and gesture had to be thought through beforehand. She didn't dare laugh loudly or talk too much. Even the sound of opening her bedroom door each night had to be as quiet as possible, as if afraid of disturbing the silent, rigid order of the place. Whenever Mike messaged to ask how she was, she only replied briefly, "I'm fine. Dad's the same. Everything's okay." But deep down, she knew the growing feeling inside her was anything but okay. A vague, lost, uneasy sense of being out of place with the gruff old man in an apartment burdened by the weight of the past. From the day Mike left, Sarah's life in the building became increasingly silent, even suffocating. All activities followed a cold, prearranged rhythm. Walter didn't change much, remaining a thin, silent figure, speaking curtly. But recently, he'd started showing more concern for her in an unusual way. At first, it was just brief questions like, "You enjoying your food?" or "You tired today?" Then he began brewing herbal tea for her daily, saying it was a family remedy Mike's mother used to calm nerves and nourish the blood of newly married women, especially helpful for sleep and stress. Hearing this, Sarah didn't think much of it. On one hand, she felt he was old and kind-hearted, so she should accept it. On the other, she was struggling with insomnia, so she drank it. At first, she only sipped half a cup, then drank it all, when she noticed nothing unusual. But soon she began to sense something was wrong. During the day, she often felt tired, her eyes burned, her throat was dry, and sometimes while doing housework, she'd get dizzy, her mind muddled as if covered by fog. Sometimes while cooking, she'd forget what she was doing, standing silently in the kitchen for minutes, unable to recall if she'd chopped vegetables or put the pan on the stove. She thought it was just fatigue from missing Mike, but this confusion wasn't normal weariness. It felt like someone was slowly draining her energy, sinking her mind into a semi-conscious state. On a Friday evening, the symptoms became even worse. It was colder than usual, and the sea wind whistled through the door cracks, howling like a cry. Sarah felt dizzy after dinner. As soon as she lay on the bed, without even dozing off, she fell into a deep sleep, so deep that no sound could wake her. She didn't dream or have nightmares, just felt herself being sucked into a dark, thick void with no escape. She didn't realize she'd been targeted by Walter. The next morning, she woke with a start as sunlight streamed onto the bed. The clock showed it was nearly 8 so. She sat up in a panic, her body heavy, as if weighed down by a ton of bricks, her eyes burning, her head throbbing dully, her heart pounding because she didn't understand what had happened. She couldn't remember when she'd fallen asleep or why she'd slept from the previous afternoon until morning. She went downstairs, her steps unsteady. In the kitchen, she saw Walter cooking porridge, still wearing his old sweater, his posture slightly hunched, his expression as calm as ever. Seeing her, he nodded slightly and asked in an offhand tone, without the slightest surprise, "Sleep well, Sarah?" Sarah rubbed her eyes, looking confused, as if she hadn't fully woken from a dream. Her voice was hoarse from just waking up. I slept from afternoon till now. I overslept, Dad. I don't understand why I slept so heavily. I've never been like this before." Walter kept his calm expression, pouring the porridge, not looking at her, just smiling faintly and replying casually, as if the answer was obvious. "It's just the herbal tea I made for you. It soothes the nerves. You need rest. Sleeping more is healthy." Sarah smiled weakly but felt uneasy. She clearly remembered she wasn't a heavy sleeper and had never slept so long and deeply that she lost track of time and space. After that strange night and Walter's casual explanation about the herbal tea, Sarah began to genuinely worry about herself. The symptoms weren't just fatigue or insomnia. Her mind grew more muddled each day. She often forgot what she'd done the morning before, and in the afternoon she felt confused, as if trapped in a fog with no escape. One day while washing dishes, water overflowed the sink without her noticing, her hands still moving mechanically, her thoughts wandering to some unclear place. Even when the phone rang, it took her minutes to realize it was hers. She started writing small notes to remember what to do, but the more she wrote, the more everything jumbled together. Mike video called her once. Seeing her bewildered expression, he asked worriedly, but she just smiled and lied, saying she was tired from the cold weather and couldn't sleep well. She didn't dare tell the truth because she wasn't sure herself what was happening. But deep down, she knew her clarity was being slowly stripped away, gently and subtly, as if someone was pressing her mind with invisible hands. One morning, after feeling like she'd woken from a week of confusion, Sarah decided to stop drinking Walter's herbal tea. She didn't say anything, just quietly poured the tea into the sink, rinsed the cup clean, and put it back, repeating this the next day and the day after. Strangely, her memory began to clear. The previous blanks in her mind gradually filled in. Her head no longer felt heavy, her eyes stopped burning, and her reactions quickened. She could remember small things, like where she put her Metro card, when to hang the laundry, or the plant watering schedule, things that had been completely blurry before. It was like being pulled from under a black veil, breathing clear air again, but with a growing fear. She knew there was something in the herbal tea Walter gave her, and she knew he knew it too. That morning, while cleaning the kitchen, Sarah decided to check the commonly used condiment jars. Pretending to be casual, she opened each lid one by one. When she opened the white sugar jar, her heart nearly stopped. Beneath the sugar was a small, clear plastic bag containing a few partially open pills on a strip. She took them out, gently wiped away the sugar, and read the blurred print on the strip. Trangzine, a strong sedative. She'd read about it in a tabloid article about cases where women were drugged and lost control of their actions. Her hands trembled, her heart pounded, her throat dry as if she'd swallowed sand. All her vague suspicions suddenly became clear with a burning sensation. It was no longer a feeling, but a stark truth. She quickly put the pills back, pretending she hadn't seen anything. That afternoon she couldn't eat, but Walter ate as usual, silent, only occasionally glancing at her. There was something different in his eyes, but she didn't dare look back. After dinner, he called her to the living room, handed her an old wooden box, saying it was a keepsake from Mike's mother, Eleanor, and told her to try on the clothes inside to see if they fit. His voice was steady, but his eyes held a strange expectation. Sarah opened the box. Inside was an old dress, a rusty makeup box, and a wooden comb. The smell of old powder filled her nostrils, nearly suffocating her. She'd never heard him talk about Mike's mother before, and now he was handing her these items, telling her to try them on like an offer she couldn't refuse. She forced a smile, trying to stay composed, and cleverly asked to take them to her room to look at privately. When she closed the door, her hands dropped, her fingers tightly clutching the dress's edge, as if grasping a harsh truth she'd been afraid to face. After standing motionless for a while, she mustered her courage, held the dress, looked in the mirror, and tried it on. The soft fabric felt cold like water. As soon as she put it on, she felt a chill, as if someone was standing behind her, staring intently. She turned around, but no one was there. At that moment, she understood what Walter was doing. It wasn't just care or a father-in-law's affection. For his daughter-in-law, it was a substitution, a morbid obsession with his deceased wife's image. He wanted to recreate Eleanor in a younger, fresher form, but with a manipulated soul. Sarah immediately took off the dress, put it back in the box, and tucked it deep into the wardrobe's bottom. Then she took a deep breath, trying to calm herself to avoid showing any flaws. But that night at dinner, she couldn't hold back. She put down her chopsticks, looked up, her voice trembling but steady enough. "Dad, what kind of medicine are you giving me?" Walter, holding his rice bowl, stopped. His eyes locked onto hers. A flicker of light passed and vanished. The corner of his mouth twitched slightly, his voice slow but tinged with unease. His face paled slightly, but she saw it clearly. "Dad just wants to calm you down. You're always too stressed." At that moment, Sarah was certain he was hiding something bigger than the pills in the sugar. From that brief dinner conversation, she had no more doubts. Walter was deliberately controlling her mind in a subtle way. Even more terrifying was the nervous look in his eyes when she asked about the medication. His evasion, his justification with calmness, like a twisted mask. That night, Sarah lay awake, tossing and turning, eyes closed but too afraid to fall into deep sleep. Every subtle sound in the hallway made her heart pound. Around 3 a.m., amid the faint sound of the sea breeze and the ticking clock, Sarah's thoughts drifted to the 3rd floor, a place Walter never allowed her to enter. When she first arrived, as his daughter-in-law, Mike mentioned it was his mother's room when she was alive. Since her death, Walter kept it locked, and no one was allowed in. But now her intuition told her the 3rd floor hid something important, a secret never revealed. The next morning, when Walter left to play dominoes, Sarah seized the chance, took the spare keychain from the desk drawer, and went upstairs quietly, pausing at each step to listen. The 3rd floor door was at the end of the hallway, its paint peeling in patches. The lock was intact, but the key worked after 3 tries. She took a deep breath and turned the lock. The dry, grating sound tightened her heart, as if she'd touched something forbidden. Gently pushing the door open, a blast of cold air hit her. The air was heavy, like it had been sealed for years. She flipped the switch, and a faint yellow light illuminated the dusty room. The smell of mildew mixed with something musty and indistinct. She scanned every corner. The furniture was intact, including a dressing table by the window. The mirror was blurry but still reflected her image. She stepped closer, touching the eye. Table's surface. Dust coated her fingertips, but in the center was a neatly placed photograph in a wooden frame, old and yellowed. It showed a younger Walter and a woman beside him, his wife, Eleanor. Her eyes were kind, but blurred by time. What made Sarah tremble was how similar Eleanor's face was to hers. The eyes, nose, and mouth weren't identical, but bore a haunting resemblance. Goosebumps prickled her skin as she picked up the frame and studied it. Then her gaze stopped on something unmistakable. Walter's smile in the photo wasn't a normal, happy one. It was forced, slightly crooked, and his eyes were hollow, unfamiliar, as if he didn't know he was smiling or was performing something unnatural. Sarah put the frame down, her mind in chaos, about to leave. But her gaze caught a patch of peeling paint on the wall opposite the bed, where the light didn't reach. She stepped closer, turned on her phone's flashlight, and aimed it at the wall, nearly screaming. Scratched with a sharp object, each letter was messy, trembling, as if written in a panicked rush. "Don't trust him!" The words were short but stabbed into her mind, chilling her. Her blood felt frozen. She stepped back, eyes wide, mouth moving silently, a chill sliding down her spine. The air felt thick and suffocating. She didn't understand why that message was there, who wrote it, when, or why it warned her. But one thing was certain. Her fear had reached its limit. Everything was piecing together in her mind, like rewinding a tape. Walter was drugging her tea, making her wear his wife's clothes, keeping a forbidden room, and now a message screamed from the past. It all pointed to a dark truth. Even if she didn't know the full picture, she understood one thing. If she didn't escape this bizarre game soon, she could be the next to be twisted. She backed toward the door, hands trembling, her mind swirling with unanswered questions. But as she descended each step, a new determination formed. She would uncover everything, no matter how cruel the truth, because she could no longer trust anything Walter said. After discovering the chilling message, "Don't trust him," in Eleanor's room, Sarah's state of mind unraveled. She was constantly confused and uneasy, haunted by vague images she couldn't tell were real or imagined. Every night, despite trying to stay awake, she fell into restless, exhausted sleep, plagued by nightmares. She dreamed of being locked in a cramped studio apartment, its window covered with wire mesh, only a small hole at the top letting in faint light. She screamed, cried, pounded the door until her hands bled, but no one answered. Outside there were no footsteps, only a low male voice echoing close to her ear, whispering chillingly, "You can't go anywhere. You're mine. Always mine." The voice was so familiar it terrified her even after waking. Opening her eyes to the real darkness of her second-floor room, her heart pounded, sweat coated her forehead, and the blanket and pillow were a mess. Her mind still echoed with the dream's sounds. She couldn't recall details, only that her body felt sore, as if dragged, with red marks on her wrists, like someone had gripped her tightly. Some nights, she woke to find herself standing before the third-floor door, hand on the knob. The door was still closed, but her heart nearly stopped. She didn't know why she was there when she'd climbed the stairs, or why her mind was blank, as if her memory had been erased. That feeling was no longer vague, but a clear sign she was being invisibly controlled, like someone was pulling her mind's strings from within. She began keeping a sleep diary, taking phone photos each morning of the blanket, pillow, and teacup's position, to ensure no one was secretly entering her room or moving things. But the more she tried to control it, the more she felt trapped, in a mental maze, losing direction, unable to distinguish reality from imagination. One afternoon, while collecting clothes from the balcony during a sudden rain, she felt a sharp chest pain. Her vision blurred for seconds, her heart beating violently, as if squeezed. She dropped the damp shirt and collapsed onto a stool. At that moment, she knew she couldn't bear it alone anymore. She had to speak out, to find help, even if just a glimmer of light from the outside world. That night, when Walter had gone upstairs and the apartment was silent, Sarah locked herself in her room, took out her phone, and called Kevin, her high school friend, now a lawyer in Midtown Manhattan. The phone rang 3 times before he answered. Kevin's voice was quick and decisive. "Hello, Sarah. Why are you calling so late?" Sarah held the phone, her hand trembling slightly, her voice strained from being suppressed too long. I don't know where to start, but Kevin, I think my father-in-law, Walter, is trying to control me." Kevin was silent for a few seconds, processing her words. Sarah continued, the words pouring out uncontrollably. "I feel like I can't control my sleep. I'm sleepwalking. I wake up in places I can't explain. And I found medication in the sugar, Tranxene. And there's a message in Eleanor's room. Someone wrote, 'Don't trust him.'" Her voice weakened, as if strangled. On the other end, Kevin's voice was almost a shout. "You have to get out of there!" After the call, Sarah felt like she'd grabbed a lifeline in a raging flood. She knew she couldn't stay silent or fight alone anymore. A dark, unspoken premonition grew clearer, like dust being brushed away to reveal a deep crack in the seemingly solid surface of her husband's home. The next morning, while Walter went to the track as usual, Sarah took the chance to clean the storeroom behind the apartment, where Mike said his childhood things were kept, the only place Walter never minded her entering. The storeroom was dusty, webbed with cobwebs, and stacked with cardboard boxes. She carefully pulled down each box, wiped away dust, and checked. Labels. When she reached the 4th box, her hand stopped. At the bottom was an old photo album with a dark red velvet cover. No name or title, only a small, rusty, unlocked clasp. She opened it easily and flipped through, her heart nearly leaping. Out. They were wedding photos, clearly Mike's, but the woman beside him wasn't her. It was another girl with a small face and melancholy eyes, standing next to Mike in a plain white dress. Below the photo, written in pen, was Mike and Lisa. 2018. Sarah's throat tightened, her hands trembling violently, nearly dropping the album. She flipped through more photos, wedding shots, candid moments, pictures of them holding hands near the Staten Island waterfront. There were photos of Lisa in her wedding dress in the bedroom, eyes empty, with Mike beside her, smiling faintly. His eyes then were different from those he'd given Sarah on their wedding day. There was an indescribably strange quality. She stood dumbfounded for a long time, then quickly put the album in a cloth bag and hid it in her bedroom drawer. That night, she subtly asked Walter at dinner, careful not to mention Lisa's name, pretending she'd heard it from a neighbor. "Dad, did Mike know anyone before me? I heard Agnes downstairs say he'd taken wedding photos before." Walter, eating, suddenly stopped. His eyes darkened. He set his chopsticks on the table, looked at her seriously, his voice tense. "Don't dig up old stuff. What's past is past. If you live in this house, don't be nosy or talk nonsense. Understand?" Sarah nodded, lowering her head, but her mind was in turmoil. That night, she couldn't sleep. She messaged Kevin, sending photos from the album, and asked him to check medical records, residential records, and anything related to Lisa, the woman in the photos. 3 days later, Kevin called back, his voice filled with shock and tension. "Sarah, I found her. Her full name's Lisa Miller, born 1994, from a working-class neighborhood in Queens. She was registered as temporarily living at Walters from 2018 to 2019, then disappeared. Before that, she was hospitalized at a local psychiatric hospital for anxiety disorder with suicidal tendencies." Kevin hesitated, then continued. "But I found an old doctor who used to work there, Dr. Peterson. He's retired, but remembers Lisa's case. He said her condition wasn't as severe as the records claimed, just post-marital stress and mild insomnia. But oddly, she was discharged less than a month after admission, without a formal medical assessment, and he never saw her again." Sarah was silent, her head exploding. Everything was taking shape. Mike had been married before. That woman was sent to a psychiatric hospital under suspicious circumstances, then vanished without a trace, and all information was buried. No one in the building mentioned Lisa, no wedding photos displayed, no discussion. It was as if she'd never existed. Sarah hung up, her heart pounding. She sat numbly by the window all afternoon, Walter's words echoing. Don't dig up old matters. But that prohibition only made her want to dig deeper. If there was nothing suspicious, why hide? It like this? The strange dreams, locked images and whispers. You can't go anywhere. Returned, clearer, closer to her ear. She began to fear not just Walter, but the secret he and Mike were hiding. Sarah couldn't take it anymore. After uncovering the truth about Mike's first wife, Lisa, who vanished with a questionable mental health record and was erased from Walter's narrative, her heart burned. Every strange dream, vague whisper, and detail she'd thought was coincidence now fit together. They all pointed to the back alley storeroom, the one place Walter forbade her from entering, always locked, claiming it was full of old moldy junk not worth seeing. But Sarah no longer believed him. She felt something was truly hidden there, something that would unravel the entire veil of secrecy. That morning, when Walter said he was going to play cards, Sarah waited for him to leave, then went to the living room with the spare key she'd secretly taken. She tried it on the storeroom lock, but it didn't work. She wasn't surprised. She knew he'd changed it. She grabbed a cleaver from the kitchen and returned to the dusty wooden door. Her heart pounded as if it would burst. Her hands trembled with fear and determination. She wedged the cleaver into the lock and pried with all her strength, the metal grinding harshly. After several violent blows, the lock broke and fell off. She took a deep breath and pushed the door open. A cold, damp air rushed out, as if rising from underground. For a moment, she imagined someone had breathed on her face. She stepped back, but regained her composure, turned on her phone's flashlight, and walked in. The storeroom was dark and damp, smelling of mold mixed with a fishy odor that made her want to vomit. She covered her nose and shone the light around. The walls were peeling, covered in mold, the floor rough, the dust so thick no old footprints were visible. But as she aimed the light at the corner, her gaze stopped on a black stain on the cement floor, about 1/2 meter long, like dried blood. She stepped closer, heart pounding, bent down, and touched it gently. Dust fell off, revealing a brown-red stain soaked into the floor. It felt rough and chilling. She shone the light on the walls and noticed a small crack between 2 bricks. Instinctively, she reached into the crack and pulled gently, loosening an entire brick. She pulled it out with all her strength, dust flying, revealing a small hidden wall compartment, bricked up but not tightly sealed. Inside was an old wooden box, about the size of a notebook, its lid closed but unlocked. She shone the light around, to ensure no one was watching, then took the box and opened it with trembling hands. Inside was little, a slightly faded silver necklace with a circular pendant engraved with a faint line, Lisa and Mike. That alone made Sarah feel cold all over. She clutched the necklace, holding it closer to the light, certain these were Lisa's belongings, the woman from the wedding photos, Mike's first wife, now never mentioned. Beneath the necklace were small folded pieces of paper, yellowed as if preserved for years. She unfolded them gently, revealing messy, hurried handwriting, trembling letters, ink smudged but legible. I'm locked in here. I'm not crazy. I know he's drugging me. He's keeping me because I know this secret. Someone has to believe me. Sarah read each word, every sentence stabbing her mind, frantic and chilling. She had no more doubts. What was happening in this apartment wasn't just control. It was a hidden tragedy. A woman who once lived here was imprisoned like a captive, forced to bear the label of madness, now forgotten. But what made Sarah choke up wasn't just the papers, but the signature below. Each one, Lisa, incomplete, unnecessary, because she already knew the author. Holding the diary pages and the necklace engraved with Lisa's name, Sarah's heart was in turmoil, her mind swirling with unanswered questions. The scrawled words, like a cry from hell, echoed. I'm imprisoned. I'm not crazy. He's drugging me. She knew who wrote them. Mike's first wife, hidden and erased by a sophisticated web of deceit. She couldn't stay silent anymore. She needed the whole truth, even if it meant confronting the person hiding it. That afternoon, when Walter returned from the track, set a local newspaper on the table and went to wash his hands, Sarah walked into the bathroom, her face resolute, her voice steady but calm. Dad, I need to ask you something, and I hope you'll tell me the truth. Who's Lisa? The sound of running water continued, but Walter's hands paused mid-wash for a few seconds. He turned to look at her, his eyes calm with a hint of coldness. He didn't answer immediately, silent, as if swallowing a stone stuck in his throat. Then he slammed the sink's edge, water splashing everywhere, his voice tense, echoing through the room. You're not allowed to mention that name in this house. Sarah took half a step back in surprise, but stood her ground, locking eyes with him. What are you hiding? Lisa was Mike's wife, wasn't she? Where is she? Why does no one talk about her? Why is there a note in the storeroom that says I'm imprisoned? Walter spun around violently, his face no longer calm, half red, half pale, eyes bulging, twitching slightly, as if suppressing something massive about to erupt. He stepped toward her quickly, his voice squeezed through his teeth, barely audible. You've been snooping. You've been searching everywhere. You went to the storeroom alone, didn't you? Sarah didn't answer, but her eyes confirmed it. Walter nearly screamed, I told you. If you live in this house, you follow the rules. No one's allowed to mention the past. No one's allowed to pry. Lisa has nothing to do with you, and she— He choked, his eyes bloodshot, as if strangled, by memories he didn't dare face. Sarah didn't stop. She stepped forward, pulled out the crumpled paper reading I'm not crazy, and held it before him. Then who wrote this? Who was imprisoned in that storeroom? Why is there a necklace with her name and Mike's? Walter looked at the paper, then turned away as if slapped, saying nothing, just walking silently to his room and slamming the door with a thunderous sound, like a gate being buried. Sarah stood outside, heart pounding, knowing she'd hit a raw nerve. That night, the apartment's atmosphere was heavy. She checked the storeroom door and saw the lock had been replaced with a heavy iron one, sturdier than before. She returned to her room, but when she opened the wardrobe to get her phone, it was gone. She frantically searched every drawer, under the pillow, in her handbag. Nothing. All her information, evidence, and contact with Kevin were gone. The next morning, she tried to open the front door to go shopping, but it was locked from the outside with a new lock she'd never seen. Her heart felt squeezed. Walter hadn't said anything, but he was gradually controlling everything, every item, every corner of the apartment. She knew she'd discovered too much, and he was acting. 3 days passed with no contact from Kevin. None of her messages were answered, none of her calls connected. Though they'd messaged nightly, even briefly, Kevin had believed Sarah could handle the situation. But 3 days of silence made him anxious. Worst-case scenarios flooded his mind. Sarah discovered and locked up by Walter, her phone confiscated. Or even vanishing like Lisa. He couldn't wait. Early that morning, Kevin packed his things, phone, voice recorder, and a copy of Lisa's medical records, hired a taxi from Midtown, and rushed to Sarah's house on Staten Island, not daring to think another second, fearing something deeply wrong was unfolding. Arriving at the Staten Island waterfront, he dismissed the taxi and walked along a small path to the back of Walter's building, known only to long-time locals, bypassing the likely locked front door, as Sarah had said. Kevin spent hours observing the area. Only when he saw Walter exit the alley in a raincoat, carrying a large bag, heading to the track or to play cards, Did he approach, gently tapping the back alley wall 3 times, their agreed signal? No response. He knocked again, longer, and whispered, "Sarah, it's me. Kevin's here." Seconds later, a faint door latch sounded. Sarah's fearful eyes peeked through the crack, her face haggard, lips dry and cracked, eyes sunken with dark circles, like someone who hadn't slept in a week. Seeing Kevin, she nearly screamed, quickly pulling him inside and locking the door. Sarah trembled, whispering, "I thought I'd never see you again. He took my phone, locked the doors, forbade me from leaving. I'm really locked up, Kevin." Kevin hugged her tightly, feeling her heart pound. "It's okay now. I'm here. This time I won't leave you." They sat heavily in the kitchen, keeping their voices low, eyes filled with unspoken words. Sarah recounted the past 3 days. Walter changing the front and storeroom locks, searching her room, taking her phone, forcing her to sit in the living room under his watch, shadowing her every move, leaving no privacy. Kevin pulled out Lisa's medical records from his bag, pointing to a deleted note. This part originally said the family requested her admission. And who was that family? Walter. He sent Lisa to the psychiatric hospital. That hospital was tied to a document forgery scandal last year, and the timing matches Lisa's disappearance. Sarah's hands trembled, staying silent. She took out the wooden box hidden behind the stove and showed Kevin the paper. "I'm not crazy. I'm imprisoned." Kevin read it quickly, clasped her hand, his voice cold. "Enough. We have to act. We can't wait." They planned together. First, they'd approach neighbors who'd seen or heard but stayed silent for years. That afternoon, dressed in shabby clothes, pretending to be out-of-town relatives, they asked around. They visited Martha's herbal tea shop, an old neighbor on the waterfront drive. Sarah braced herself, entering first, Kevin close behind. After pleasantries, Martha recognized Sarah, opened the main door, and invited them to sit at the shop's old table. When Sarah mentioned investigating Lisa, Mike's former wife, Martha paused, her eyes distant, as if brushing away years of dust. She sighed, handed Sarah and Kevin each a cup of herbal tea, and spoke slowly. "I know about this, but no one's dared talk about it. Back then, I worked on the waterfront and often saw Walter, Mike, and that girl, Lisa. She was always quiet, like she had something on her mind. One night, I saw Walter dragging Lisa, forcing her into a black van. It was dark, and I couldn't see her face clearly, but she kept struggling, like she was being pulled hard. Her mouth seemed covered, so she couldn't scream, only whimpered, softly, then disappeared into the van. I never saw her again." Martha paused, lowering her head, hands trembling on the teacup. "I know I should have called the police, but my husband stopped me. He said not to meddle in others' affairs. Later we moved away, too scared to stay nearby." Martha's words hit like a slap, shattering the neighborhood's long silence. A buried truth surfaced. Kevin recorded silently, then held Sarah's hand, his eyes determined, knowing the next step was irreversible. That night, a torrential rain poured, as if the heavens wanted to end it all with a storm. The wind howled, tearing at the apartments, old window frames, rain pounding the windows. The building shook with each gust, but inside was 100 times more chaotic. When Walter returned, his raincoat soaked, his face pale from the cold rain, his eyes red with rage, he froze at the pie door, spotting unfamiliar slippers. His voice echoed in the heavy air. "Who's in my house?" Sarah and Kevin were in the kitchen, having packed the documents and recordings, startled by the door slamming open. They exchanged looks, knowing they'd been caught. Sarah pushed Kevin behind the cupboard while she walked out, feigning calm. "Dad, you're back." Walter's gaze swept the apartment, stopping at Kevin's shoes, then the dining table with 2 steaming sets of bowls and chopsticks, He walked slowly, picked up the cleaver from the draining rack, his voice low. "Who was here? Who ate with you?" Sarah tried to lie. "I was eating alone. I was hungry, so I set 2 sets of bowls and chopsticks for some atmosphere." Walter laughed dryly, a distorted sound like someone in a fit. Then he roared, "You're lying. You brought someone here. You brought outsiders into my house to dig up old stuff, didn't you?" Just then, Kevin accidentally kicked a tin can behind the wall, making a loud noise, freezing the air. Walter spun toward the sound, violently pushed open the flimsy cupboard door, and saw Kevin trembling. Before Kevin could react, Walter swung the cleaver, shouting, "You're all snakes! You want to kill me, don't you?" The cleaver grazed Kevin's arm, leaving a long red wound, blood soaking his clothes. Kevin cried out, recoiling, but Walter charged like he was possessed. In a panic, Sarah rushed forward, no longer thinking, and pushed Walter toward the narrow hallway, slamming him against the cluttered wall. He stumbled but swung the cleaver wildly. She dodged, pushed him into the room at the hallway's end, and kicked the door shut, locking it from outside. Walter roared inside like a trapped beast. "Sarah, you betrayed me! I raised you! I was so good to you! Why'd you betray me?" Sarah stepped back, hands trembling, the old lock not fully engaged due to age. But it finally clicked shut, and she gasped. Kevin sat heavily on the floor, clutching his bleeding arm. Sarah grabbed a clean towel, quickly bandaged the wound, her eyes tearing up, lips tightly sealed. She took Kevin's phone, the only one Walter hadn't found, and tremblingly dialed 911, reading each digit repeatedly in her chaos. When the call connected, she whispered through the rain, "Please come to a certain building on the waterfront drive on Staten Island. Someone's mentally unstable and attacking people with a knife. Please hurry." Minutes later, police sirens echoed in the rain, a signal of life. But inside, Walter's pounding on the door continued, his shouts unrelenting. "I won't let you ruin my life. She's mine. Her eyes, her smile, they're so much like her." When the police broke down the door, Walter was huddled in the corner, hair disheveled, face splattered with rain, eyes wild, muttering repeatedly, "I just wanted to protect all this. I just wanted her to stay with me, to keep me company at tea." Few more years. The officer's flashlight shone on his face, contorting it. Handcuffed, he didn't resist, just looked at Sarah and asked in a childlike voice, "Sarah, will you stay with me? Don't go anywhere, Eleanor." Eleanor used to say that too. Sarah didn't answer, her eyes cold with pain, her heart a storm. She stepped forward, voice tight through clenched teeth. "You weren't loving. You were destroying. How many people have you destroyed? Don't you even know?" Walter stepped back, trembling, his eyes broken. Her words were the final knife, cutting through the illusion he'd clung to. As he was put into the police car, he stopped shouting, muttering only, Eleanor, forgive me." Sarah stood at the doorway, cheeks wet, whether from rain or tears, unclear. But her eyes were no longer those of a weak victim, but of someone who'd survived hell. She helped Kevin up, and they sat heavily in the simple living room. The house was quiet now, not from peace, but because the terrible truth had been uncovered, and they knew the story was far from over. In the following days, the precinct's atmosphere felt tainted by an invisible bloodstain. In a narrow interrogation room with a slowly rotating ceiling fan and a dim incandescent lamp shining on a cold stainless steel table, Walter sat silent for a long time, eyes clouded, hair like dry grass. 2 officers waited, but only when Sarah entered and sat across from him did he slowly raise his head, eyes meeting hers, as if seeing the past he'd tried to bury for over a decade. He sighed, placed his thin, pale hands on the table, and began, speaking, as if reading horrific memories. "I used to have a wife named Eleanor. We lived peacefully until I suspected she was having an affair with a colleague. She started becoming independent, enjoying life, which panicked me. Sarah clenched her fists, listening silently. Walter's voice grew unsteady. I couldn't stand the thought of betrayal. I followed her, checked her phone, asked around. One day, we fought, and she said something I couldn't bear. She said I was old, boring, unable to meet her needs. She was leaving me. I went crazy. I pushed her, just a gentle push. But she slipped, fell down the steep stairs, her head hitting the concrete steps. Blood. So much blood. He paused, eyes wide, as if seeing the scene, then whispered. People thought it was an accident. I didn't tell the truth. I stayed silent. After some time, Mike brought Lisa home. That girl had the same eyes as Eleanor, just as stubborn, asking questions that made me uneasy. At first, I thought it was a coincidence, until she found old documents. His voice trembled. She asked about Eleanor, why the death certificate's timeline didn't match. I knew I couldn't let her turn everything upside down, so I started putting Tranxene in her tea, her soup. She slept more. Her mind got confused. I locked her in the back alley storeroom where Eleanor used to keep junk or hang laundry. Kevin stood behind the one-way mirror, fists clenched until his knuckles whitened. Sarah lowered her head, throat tight, as if strangled. Walter continued. At first, I gave her enough food and water, but she kept screaming, pounding the door, threatening to call the police. I was terrified, so I locked it tighter, stopped giving her food. I thought it'd just be a few days, but she got weaker and stopped talking. When I opened the door, she wasn't moving anymore. A deathly silence spread. The recording officer stayed silent. Walter laughed dryly. I panicked. I took her body, wrapped it up, and dug a pit in the cement in the back alley in the corner. It's always damp and dark there, hard to notice. I buried her there. Since then, I can't go near that corner. Sarah screamed, You're a monster! What did you think was love? That wasn't love. That was pathology. That was murder. Walter fell silent, closing his eyes, neither resisting nor defending himself, as if all his strength was drained by the past. That afternoon, guided by Walter and referencing records, the police and a forensic team arrived at the apartment. Sarah and Kevin stood at a distance, watching the digging in the back alley's corner. Sarah felt a chilling sensation, as if viewing her life through someone else's lens. Each shovel of dirt unearthed a piece of buried truth until an officer shouted, I found skeletal remains. Everyone stopped. A small, rusty iron box was dug up from the deep pit. Inside were a few small bones, a faded silver bracelet, and a crumpled piece of paper with trembling, legible handwriting. My name is Lisa Miller. I'm not crazy. I was tricked into coming here. Sarah stood numbly, the wind messing her hair, but she felt nothing. A tear rolled down her cheek, but she didn't sob. Her heart held not pain, but chilling sorrow. A truth was confirmed. A person had lived, loved, fought evil, but was buried under concrete, forgotten in a small city's silence. Though late, Lisa was finally brought to light. The perfect crime was exposed. But in Sarah's heart, one thing was clear. The story wasn't over. Walter's confession lacked the final piece, one she suspected involved Mike, and the remaining truth awaited her search. After the case closed, the dilapidated 3-story building was cordoned off with yellow police tape, like a rope binding. The sins that had lurked within. Sarah stood at a distance, her heart no longer filled with fear or resentment, only a strong awakening. She was no longer the timid woman forcing herself to live in a toxic home, the wife waiting tearfully for her husband, or the daughter-in-law hiding from watchful eyes. Now she was a survivor, a witness, speaking for the souls buried underground. She returned to Midtown with Kevin, starting a charity called Metro Haven, welcoming women in the city who'd suffered mental abuse, imprisonment, or control in seemingly peaceful families, silenced for too long. In their cramped, rented studio apartment office, with just a table, a few chairs, and a sign reading, "I believe you. I'm here to support you." Sarah and Kevin met women daily who shared similar stories. Husbands locking them in rooms, fathers-in-law drugging their tea, mothers-in-law manipulating them mentally. Some had become shadows of themselves, scared because they'd loved the wrong person, or because society told them to endure. Sarah listened without interrupting or judging, because she'd been one of them, and knew that someone believing them could give them courage to step out of darkness. Soon, the media noticed her story. Newspapers like the Post and Times covered the Staten Island case. TV stations invited her onto talk shows, and reporters came for interviews. An article titled, "I Survived Hell," the story of a NYC woman breaking the silence, appeared online, with Sarah's photo in dim light, her face delicate but eyes trauma-filled. Shared tens of thousands of times, it sparked a huge city reaction. Sarah didn't want fame, but saw it as a chance to inspire others to speak out. That night, after a group counseling session, Sarah and Kevin returned to their small Queens apartment. Sitting by the window, sipping iced tea, her phone vibrated. A strange message appeared, no sender name, just one line. "I wasn't alone." B. She froze. Another line followed. Lisa knew this, but she didn't dare speak. The number was blocked, showing no area code. She took a deep breath, hands trembling, and redialed. But the call disconnected instantly, the screen showing the number didn't exist. Kevin walked behind her, asking softly, "Who was it?" Sarah stared at the screen, then turned slowly, her voice certain. "It was Mike." Kevin frowned. "Your husband? But you said he didn't know anything." Sarah clutched the phone, eyes darkening. "I used to think that, but now I'm not so sure." They fell silent. The sea wind from New York Harbor blew fiercely through the window cracks, making the curtains flutter as if someone stood outside listening. Kevin whispered, "We have to re-examine Lisa's life, all records, and any gaps during Mike's time in the Middle East." Sarah nodded, a new emotion rising. Not fear, but deep vigilance, as if the man she'd loved and trusted was part of the dark picture she thought was complete. She recalled Walter's eyes when he was handcuffed. He hadn't blamed Mike or mentioned him in his confession, as if holding back the final truth. For whom? The next morning, Sarah left the Queen's apartment, a scarf fluttering in the harbor wind. Sunlight shone on her face, no longer dim but radiant, like someone who'd endured everything and stood strong. She looked at the sky, her eyes clear, a voice echoing in her mind. This war had just begun, but this time she wasn't alone. In the following weeks, Sarah and Kevin dove into every detail of the truth like seasoned detectives. They examined Mike's communication records, bank statements, and correspondence with Walter from his time in the Middle East, searching for clues. But Mike seemed cautious, leaving almost no direct evidence. All clues pointed to Walter, who appeared to take all the blame alone. Just as they felt stuck, a new lead emerged. Kevin contacted a close friend of Lisa's from when she was alive. The friend revealed that Lisa had confided that Mike was addicted to gambling before their marriage, racking up huge debts. Lisa worried constantly that his addiction would ruin their lives. The friend tried to convince him to quit, but Mike wouldn't listen. After their marriage, he grew increasingly irritable, snapping at Lisa over small things. "I knew Lisa was miserable in the marriage," the friend said. Sarah and Kevin realized this could be the key. They contacted a special unit of investigators, reporting Mike's suspected involvement in gambling fraud. The investigators launched a probe and quickly found that Mike had indeed accumulated massive gambling debts before his marriage and squandered Lisa's dowry soon after. To repay his debts, he'd colluded with the casino to scam money from Lisa's parents. Shockingly, they also discovered Mike and Walter had met an unidentified man, likely the casino owner, multiple times, suggesting an unsavory deal. After gathering enough evidence, the special unit arrested Mike, catching him gambling heavily in a Middle East casino. Faced with irrefutable evidence, Mike broke down, confessing his role in Lisa's persecution and imprisonment, but insisting, "I admit I wronged Lisa. I did terrible things to her," he cried. "But I didn't kill her. She couldn't cope," and chose to commit suicide. Investigators didn't buy his defense. They gathered more evidence proving Mike was Lisa's true killer. To erase Lisa and cover Walter's crime, Mike had orchestrated her persecution, imprisonment, and death, even implicating his father to hide the truth. Ultimately, Mike was sentenced to death, and Walter received life imprisonment for murder. Justice was served, and Lisa's grievances were redressed. After everything settled, Sarah and Kevin stood before the dilapidated 3-story building where Lisa had lived, now demolished, leaving only ruins. "Do you think it's over?" Kevin asked, his voice weary. Sarah shook her head, touching the scar on her arm from the cleaver. "Maybe for Lisa it's over. But for us, the battle's just begun. Too many women still live in fear and silence. We have to speak for them, help them step out of the dark." They returned to Metro Haven, continuing to aid women suffering mental abuse and control. Their story spread worldwide, inspiring others to stand up and face the darkness. Sarah knew Lisa's story would always drive her, reminding her not to give up hope or stop fighting, because only when all lanterns are lit will the darkness be dispelled. Years later, Mike died in prison during his sentence. Before his death, he wrote Sarah a confession letter, admitting his undeniable role in Lisa's death and his tormenting guilt. He begged her forgiveness, hoping she could forget him and start anew. Reading the letter, Sarah felt conflicted. Hatred for his cruelty and selfishness, pity for his weakness. Ultimately, she chose to forgive him, letting go of the past to begin again. Sarah continued running Metro Haven, helping countless women overcome difficulties. She became a prominent city figure, her story touching many. On a bright sunny afternoon, she stood at the Staten Island waterfront gazing at the horizon, her heart full. She thought of Lisa, Walter, Mike, and the past. Taking a deep breath, she inhaled the sorrow, then exhaled, releasing the pain. Closing her eyes, she felt the sea breeze on her cheeks. She knew the past couldn't be changed, but she could create a beautiful future. Sarah opened her eyes, filled with hope and determination. She believed that with love and courage, they could overcome all obstacles and build a beautiful life. She turned and left the waterfront, her steps firm and strong. Her path was long, but she wouldn't back down. She'd fight for women's rights in the city until her last moment. Years later, Metro Haven became one of New York's most well-known charities, helping tens of thousands of women. Sarah became a legendary figure, her name forever remembered. Her story teaches us that, even in darkness, we must bravely pursue light. With love and courage, we can overcome all difficulties and create a beautiful life. Thanks for sticking with the story until the end. If you enjoyed it, give this a like and share if you haven't already, and subscribe for more.